Hello, and welcome to Kaz English, your ultimate destination for mastering the English language. Whether you're a beginner or looking to polish your skills, we've got you covered with engaging lessons and practical tips. Don't forget to visit our website at kazap.uk. That's KAZAPP.uk for exclusive resources and additional learning tools to help you succeed. Let's dive into today's lesson and take your English to the next level.
All right, ready to dive into another English conversation?
Let's do it.
Today we're taking a look at a chat between two students, Peter and Sophie. They're working on a group project, facing that looming deadline, and figuring out who's doing what.
Sounds familiar. We've all been there.
Exactly. It's a universal experience, right?
Absolutely.
But what's cool is that even in this everyday scenario, there's so much we can learn about English.
Oh, yeah. Tons of useful vocab and grammar just waiting to be discovered.
So let's break it down and see what gems we can unearth.
That's good to me.
Okay, so the scene is set. Project deadline, ticking clock. Sophie jumps right in and says,
Let's hear it.
Peter, shall we divide the tasks for our group project?
Okay, so right off the bat, we see how English speakers make suggestions. Shall we? It's polite, it's collaborative, it's not a demand.
It's an invitation to get organized.
Exactly.
And Peter's totally on board. He replies, good idea. We need to meet the deadline next week. See? Straight to the point, acknowledging that deadline.
Definitely focus. So how do they actually decide who does what?
Well, this is where it gets interesting. Sophie says, I can handle the research part if you want to do the presentation.
Okay, pause right there. I can handle. It's not just I do research. She's expressing her ability, her confidence.
Makes her sound capable and willing to take on the task.
Exactly. And then there's the if you want to. It softens the suggestion, gives Peter a choice.
It's all about that smooth, natural flow in English conversations, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Now, Peter, being like many of us who prefer to avoid presentations, he jumps at this chance. He says, that works for me. Let's coordinate our findings regularly.
That works for me. Write that down.
Yeah.
Such a versatile phrase for agreeing in English.
And it sounds so casual and natural.
It does. And notice how he uses coordinate. It highlights that they need to stay in sync, communicate throughout the project.
They're not just splitting the work. They're planning to collaborate effectively.
Right on.
And Sophie adds, we should set up a shared document to track our progress.
Progress, another great word. It's all about seeing how far you've come, how much you've achieved.
And using a shared document. Genius. It's such a practical tip, not just for projects, but for anything you're working on.
Absolutely. Like learning new English words. Keep track of your progress.
Great idea. Now, Peter, eager to get this show on the road, asks, absolutely. How often should we check in with each other?
He's getting specific, emphasizing that regular communication is key. And listen to how he uses should. It's a subtle way of asking for a recommendation.
He's not just asking for a yes or no. He wants her input.
Exactly. Now, what does Sophie suggest?
She says, maybe we could have brief daily updates online. Could hear that. It makes the suggestion sound softer, less demanding than should.
It does. Modal verbs like could, should, would, they're like adjusting the tone of your voice in English.
So important for navigating those nuances in conversation.
Totally.
And Peter, ever the efficient one, replies, perfect. Let's start right away to stay on schedule. They're not wasting any time.
Action-oriented, these two. And look at that, schedule pops up again. Sticking to a plan, managing time-essential skills, not just for students.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've walked through this conversation step by step.
Okay.
But along the way, we've highlighted some seriously useful vocabulary, deadline, coordinate, and progress.
Words you'll encounter everywhere. So let's take a closer look at each of them and really understand what they mean.
Perfect. So deadline. What comes to mind when you hear that word?
Well, for me, deadline means that point of no return. It's that date when something absolutely has to be done.
It can be a bit scary, but it also motivates us to get things finished.
Right. Think work projects, bills, even catching that train deadlines are everywhere.
They are. They keep us on track. Now, coordinate. What about that one?
Well, coordinate is all about making things work together smoothly.
It's about teamwork, making sure everyone's on the same page. Think about planning a trip with friends or even, I don't know, matching outfits for a special occasion.
Exactly. It's not just about big projects. It's an everyday skill.
Totally. And lastly, progress. That's a word that should make you feel good.
Oh, absolutely. Progress means you're moving forward, getting closer to your goal.
Every step counts. And think about it. When you learn a new English word, that's progress. You're one step closer to fluency.
Exactly. And that feeling of progress is what keeps us motivated to keep going, right?
Definitely. Now, we've covered the vocab, but there's another layer to mastering English conversation:
What's that?
sentence structure. We need to understand how those words are put together to create meaning.
Ah, the building blocks of English sentences. I like it.
So let's go back to Sophie's line. I can handle the research part if you want to do the presentation. This, my friend, is a prime example of a conditional sentence.
If-then statements, they're everywhere in English.
Right. One thing depends on another. Sophie taking on the research depends on Peter being okay with the presentation.
Makes sense.
Think about it. If it rains, I'll take an umbrella. Or, if I finish work early, I'll give you a call.
Those are perfect examples.
Everyday situations, expressed with that if-then structure. It's a must-know for English learners.
Totally agree.
Now, another sentence that's packed with grammar goodness. We should set up a shared document to track our progress.
Ah, this one is a good one. Should, and something called an infinitive phrase all in one sentence. Let's break it down.
Okay, so should, it's softer than must, right?
Yeah.
More like a recommendation, a suggestion.
Exactly. We really ought to do this. It's a good idea. That's the vibe.
Right. And then we have to track our progress. This, my friends, is what we call an infinitive phrase to plus a verb.
And often, like in this case, it explains the purpose of something. They're setting up the document in order for the purpose of tracking their progress.
It adds that extra layer of information and clarity to the sentence.
Precisely. And the more you start noticing these structures, the more you'll understand how native English speakers put sentences together.
It's like unlocking a secret code.
I love that analogy.
So even this simple chat between two students, it's a treasure trove of English language insights, isn't it?
It totally is. It shows you don't need to be talking about complex topics to find valuable examples of how English is used naturally.
Absolutely. It's all about training your ear to hear those patterns and then, of course, practicing them until they become second nature.
Practice makes perfect. Or at least it makes progress.
Exactly. And speaking of practice, there's this awesome resource I think our listeners will absolutely love, especially if they're enjoying this deep dive into everyday English conversation.
Oh, tell me more. I'm always on the lookout for great resources.
It's called Kaz English, and it's perfect for anyone learning English, especially at the beginner and intermediate levels. They have this incredible collection of conversations, just like the one we've been analyzing, covering all sorts of everyday situations.
Wow, so it's all about giving learners exposure to authentic English conversations.
Yes, and they don't just throw you into the deep end. They have this fantastic learning player that breaks down each conversation step by step. You can listen, repeat, even record yourself to check your pronunciation.
That's brilliant. It sounds like having a personal English tutor right there in your pocket.
Right, and because it focuses on those everyday conversations, you're learning the kind of English you'll actually use in real life.
So practical. Where can our listeners find out more about Kaz English?
Easy peasy. Just visit their website at https.kazapp.uk. You won't regret it.
Okay, before we move on, let's circle back to those key vocabulary words. Deadline, coordinate, and progress.
These aren't just words. They're concepts, ideas that are important for life in general, not just for language learning.
That's so true. It's fascinating how language reflects these broader themes.
Absolutely. So, listeners, as we continue our deep dive, think about those deadlines in your own life, the times you need to coordinate with others, and the areas where you're making progress.
Because these ideas are going to keep popping up.
Yeah.
They're fundamental to how we navigate the world.
They are. All right, ready for the next part of our conversation analysis?
Absolutely. Let's dive in. You know, it's amazing how much we can squeeze out of a simple conversation like this one. It's like a mini English course all packed into a few lines.
It is, and it's also relatable, too. Like, we've all been there trying to figure out who does what on a project with a deadline.
Exactly.
And since it's such a universal experience, we can really zero in on the language.
Oh, yeah.
See how the vocab and grammar work in a real setting.
It's like learning by doing, but with conversation.
Exactly.
Uh.
Okay, so let's zoom in on some of those phrases that are super helpful for English learners, especially those who want to,
Level up their speaking skills.
yeah, like right from the start, Sophie's line, "Peter, shall we divide the tasks for our group project?" It's such a smooth way to kick things off.
It is. And it shows us how those modal verbs work in real life, shall we? It's not command. It's more like, hey, let's work on this together.
It's an invitation to collaborate.
Right.
And it sounds so much more natural than just saying, let's divide the tasks.
Totally agree. Okay, another phrase we can't miss is Peter's reply, That works for me. Simple yet so effective.
It's like the magic phrase for agreeing in English.
It is. You can use it in so many situations. Someone suggests a time for a meeting. That works for me. Someone offers to bring dessert.
That works for me.
Exactly. It's clear, concise, and it just makes you sound like a natural English speaker.
Love it. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about sentence structure.
Okay.
There's one sentence here that's a perfect example of how conditional sentences work in English. Those if-then statements.
You're talking about, I can handle the research part if you want to do the presentation.
That's the one. Sophie's basically saying, I'll do this if you do that.
A classic conditional sentence.
And it's such a useful structure. You can use it to negotiate responsibilities, make plans.
Oh, yeah. Imagine you're talking to a friend. You could say, if you want to grab dinner, I'll pick the place. Or if you can finish that report, I'll review it.
So many possibilities.
Right. The more you practice these if-then sentences, the smoother your English will sound.
Absolutely. Okay, now there's another sentence I want to dissect. It's Sophie's suggestion. We should set up a shared document to track our progress.
This one's great. It highlights a structure that can be a little tricky too, plus a verb, also known as an infinitive phrase.
Infinitive phrases. They found fancy.
They do, but they're actually quite common. So, in this case, to track our progress explains why they're setting up the document. It's like saying, we should set up a shared document for the purpose of tracking our progress.
It adds that extra layer of detail and makes the sentence more precise.
Right. And infinitive phrases are everywhere. I went to the store to buy some milk, or she called me to ask for directions.
It's like they're adding a little explanation, a little why to the sentence.
Exactly. They make your English more interesting and more complete.
I love it. Okay, so we've looked at some specific phrases and sentences, but let's step back for a moment. What are the big takeaways from this conversation between Peter and Sophie?
Well, for me, one of the biggest lessons is the power of being clear and concise. You don't need to use big words or complicated grammar to communicate effectively.
Totally. Peter and Sophie got their points across without any unnecessary fluff.
Exactly. And for beginners, that's really encouraging. You don't have to wait until you've mastered every grammar rule to start speaking English.
You can jump right in with what you know and keep building from there.
And every conversation is a chance to learn and improve. Okay, before we wrap up this section, let's revisit those key vocabulary words we've been talking about. Deadline, coordinate, and progress.
They've been woven throughout this whole conversation, and for a good reason. These aren't just words for students or projects. They're concepts that apply to all of us.
It's amazing how language connects to these bigger ideas, right?
It really is.
Yeah.
So, listeners, as we move on to the final part of our analysis, think about the deadlines you're facing, the times you need to coordinate with others, and the areas where you're making progress.
Because these themes are going to keep coming back, and they're not just about learning English, they're about navigating life. It's so easy to just keep going and forget to pause and think about how far we've come.
I know, right?
But recognizing that progress, even the small steps, can be so motivating.
It reminds us that we're moving forward, right?
Exactly. We're always learning and growing.
And that brings us back to Peter and Sophie. Remember how they decided to set up a shared document
Uh-huh.
to track their progress?
It's a great strategy. It's like having a visual reminder of everything you've accomplished.
I love that idea.
Yeah.
Like seeing those new words you've learned or the grammar rules you've mastered. It's like a little pat on the back.
It is. Okay, and speaking of feeling good about your progress, let's talk about that resource we mentioned earlier
Oh, yes. Kaz English.
for practicing those real-life English conversations.
Exactly. It's like a personalized English course, but without the stuffy classroom vibe.
I like that. So it's perfect for beginners who might feel a bit intimidated by traditional learning methods.
Right. And it's all based on authentic conversations like the one we've been analyzing. So you're not just learning grammar rules from a textbook. You're seeing how those rules work in real-life situations.
That's so important because at the end of the day, it's about understanding the nuances of how English is actually spoken.
Absolutely. And Kaz English gives you that insider's perspective, their learning player, and their library of dialogues. It's all designed to help you build fluency in a way that feels natural and fun.
Seems amazing. So if you're ready to level up your English conversation skills, head over to https://kazap.uk and check out Kaz English.
You won't regret it. All right, as we wrap up our deep dive today, we want to leave you with a little challenge.
A challenge.
I like it. We've analyzed the dialogue, we've explored the vocab and grammar. Now it's your turn to put it all into practice.
Okay, I'm game. What's the challenge?
Think of a situation in your own life where you might need to collaborate with someone in English.
Okay.
Could be a project at work, a study group, or even just making plans with friends.
Got it.
How could you use the phrases and vocabulary we've discussed to communicate effectively and get things done?
I love that challenge. It's all about applying those learnings to real-life situations.
Exactly. Remember, Sophie's confident I can handle, or Peter's clear and casual. That works for me.
And don't forget those modal verbs, shall we? Could we? They make such a difference in how your suggestions sound.
They do.
Huh.
And most importantly, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Every mistake is a chance to learn and grow.
So true. Embrace those everyday interactions. Be curious and have fun with it.
Absolutely. That's it for our deep dive today. We hope you enjoyed this journey into the world of everyday English conversations.
And until next time, happy learning, everyone.
Thanks for joining the conversation here at Kaz English. We hope you found it fun and informative. Don't forget to check out kazapp.uk. That's kazapp.uk for more tips, resources, and interactive practice. Keep exploring, keep chatting, and we'll catch up with you again soon.